Good evening from Beirut. We are exactly a year since the most devastating explosion ever hit this city. Hundreds of people killed, thousands wounded, and billions of dollars of damage in a country that was already effectively bankrupt. Now, 1 year on, no one has been prosecuted, no one has been charged, and the same politicians that presided over that catastrophe last year are still effectively in charge of the country today. I want to welcome you to this special program from Beirut. In the next hour, we're going to be hearing from guests talking to us about the political situation here, the economic situation, and a bit as well about the psychological impact of that explosion on Beirut. First, though, let's go back to a year ago today, the 4th of August 2020, and remind ourselves what happened from 6 in the evening.
It was just after 6 p.m. on Tuesday, August 4th, 2020. After a loud explosion at Beirut's port, these residents began filming what they thought was a simple fire. But the worst was still to come. A second shock felt all the way in northern Israel and Cyprus. In the Lebanese capital, no one was left untouched.
It was a terrifying moment. For 3 minutes, I didn't understand what was happening. I saw blood on my face, but I saw people around me who were far more hurt.
I've already seen frightening things, but nothing like what I saw today. I've never been so scared in my life.
Aerial footage shows the extent of the damage. Destruction which left tens of thousands homeless. The death toll would quickly climb to over 200, with more than 7,000 others injured. Shock quickly turned to anger as the world learned the cause of the blast. 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate stored at a warehouse in the city's port. The highly explosive substance was stocked without proper safety measures, and authorities had known about it for years. In a country already plagued by corruption and economic crisis, the latest scandal was too much to bear.
It's been a while since we had any trust in our government.
All of these incompetent people in charge need to be held accountable. They're guilty of a crime against humanity.
French President Emmanuel Macron visited the city calling for political renewal. The international community pledged nearly $300 million in aid to be distributed directly to the Lebanese people. Faced with growing anger, Prime Minister Hassan Diab resigned but remained on as the head of a caretaker government. Since then, Lebanon has been in political deadlock, and the country's official investigation into the explosion has yet to deliver any conclusions.
Well, coming up shortly, there'll be the minute of silence here in Beirut as we remember the exact moment that explosion struck at the port behind me here. At the moment, there is a church service going on at the port. It's being led by the Maronite patriarch Bashar al-Rai. Let's have a listen to a little bit of the ceremony just for a few moments.
وأصدقاء الشهداء والضحايا بهذا الوقت رح بيكون في تحية من قبل القوات الجوية لكل الشهداء والضحايا المدنيين والعسكريين يلي سقطوا بالانفجار. طائرة رح تنطلق من الأرض صوب السماء وبترمز هالطائرة لأرواح أهلنا.
Yeah, you can see the flyover of those planes. They're flying over the port in the center of Beirut. We're watching those images for you live as we wait for the minute of silence to get underway here in Beirut. Well, I'm joined here now in front of the port by Rana Al-Dirani. She's an Arabic teacher who used to run an Arabic school just down the road from where we are. Rana, welcome to France 24. Thank you for being on the program today. Rana, tell us a little bit about what happened to you, what happened to your family on the 4th of August 2020.
My story is very similar to living in this neighborhood. I'm going to talk about the images that are stuck in my mind from that day. I was in the street, I was hurt, and at the same time sorry. And anyway, what happened from that day when I woke up from the debris and from all the stuff that fell on me, I saw images of almost from horror movie. Dead people, blood, body parts, destroyed houses, screaming, wailing, lost kids. All of these images were so not just sad, but it's painful to see, and also to be able to consume all of that at the same time, like what happened. And at that moment, when I woke up and I checked myself, I thought it's an Israeli airstrike. But it took me like a few minutes to recognize that it's not an airstrike, it's the whole city and the whole neighborhood is destroyed.
And Rana, we're shortly going to listen into that minute of silence live in Beirut. Before we come to that, though, just very briefly, tell us how you're feeling on this anniversary, one year on from this kind of extraordinary story that you tell us. I'm disappointed today because I'm not saying that disappointed from the people. I'm disappointed that till today, no one is held accountable for what happened, starting from our president to the smallest person who is working at the port and who knew about those ammonium nitrate. I'm disappointed that our government and these war lords, they are not getting enough of blood and shedding tears. Like they want more and more. They want to cause more pain, to cause more destruction to this city. All right, Rana, I think we are about to listen in now to that minute of silence taking place at the port of Beirut. Let's go live now to the port as we all observe that minute of silence here in Beirut.
صفين روحانا، أسمهان صاروف أبو رجيلي، ألكسندرا بول نجار، لياس الخوري، لياس خزامي، أليس باليان، أمين سعد الدين الزاهد، أمينة غربيق، إنصاف عطار، أنطوان البرمكي، أنطوان زعرور، أنطوان فلوطي، أنطوان نجا باسيل، أنات خاتشيكيان، إيتانو ديشا ساتولو، إيزابيل مشعلاني، إيفون سرسوك كوكرن، إيفات جورج الميني، إلين وهاد نوفل، أيمن العبيد، أيمن سليمان، أيمن مصطفى الحمصي، أيمن نور الدين، بايبلين سيرو هيجوس، بيرليتا مندوزا، بوليت اسكندر هاشم، بيسان الطيباطي، تيريز غندور مرعي، ثروة محمد حطيط، جاد الدحداح، جاد سميحة، جاك الجميل، جاك سركيس برامكيان، جاكلين جبرين، جان سعيد كوبلي، جان فريدريك علم، جان مارك بونفيس، جرجس فرج الله دعيبيس، جمال دودمية، العميد الركن المتقاعد جهاد عمر، جهاد مارون سعادي، جو لياس حقيقي، جو أندون، جو بوصعب، جو حداد، جو نون، جواد شيا، جود حاج سطيف، جورج السعد، جورج المعلوف، جورج الوز، جورج دمياني، جورج ماضي، جوزيف طانيوس روكوز، جوزيف لطيف مرعي، جوزفين بوزيد، جيسي أهوجي داوود، جيسيكا بزدجيان، حسام بطل، حسن أكرم شمص، حسن المانع، حسن صادق، حسن كامل حيدر، حسن مصطفى طي، حسين عبد الرحيم بشر، حمد مدحت العطار، حمزي اسكندر، حنا جرجس عقباتي، حياة جرجي فاضل، خالد وحود، خالدي بكري، خضر شفيق بدر، خليل أديب عون مجاعس، خليل عيسى، ضلي قاسم خوري، ديانا بابازيان، ديانا خوري، ديما عبد الصمد، راسيل مسعود مية، راشد حفيزور، رالف ملاحي، رامي الكعكي، رشدي الجمل، روان مسطو، روبير سمعان، ريزول منير سيكدا، زهوان أولى الدادة، زلباب ساجد علي، زياد مصطفى صبح، زيد ميتا، زينات مغرب العباس، زينة زعرور.
All right, we've been listening there to several minutes of silence here in Beirut, as well as some of the commemorations at the port. We were mentioning that the Maronite patriarch Bashar al-Rai is giving a service there. We also saw just a few moments ago a tribute from the firefighters here. Firefighters, of course, some of the first people on the scene when the explosion began at the port. I want to bring back in Rana Al-Dirani, who's with me for the start of this program. Rana, you were recounting very vividly how you felt on that day. It's worth telling our viewers that you had quite a business in Beirut. You had an Arabic school, it was very celebrated, it was very well known. What's happened to it since the explosion? Because it's just down the road.
Well, unfortunately, we could not keep it alive as was expected because, of course, another disappointment that we don't have electricity, we don't have fuel, we don't have gas, we don't have internet working, so nothing is working in this country. So we tried our best to keep it alive in person. We failed. This is another disappointment added to our plate, and it saddens me because Saifi Institute is not. It was one of the destinations where people wanted to gather and they loved the place, and we had tremendous support from this international community. But with all their love, we could not really keep going as expected.
And let me ask you, Rana, we are surrounded now by protesters, people heading towards downtown, towards Parliament, to voice their anger at politicians. You've expressed to me a little bit of your anger, a little bit of your frustration. Tell us, will you be taking part in the protests? And if the answer is yes, why?
I'm joining today the protest. I was waiting for today for a whole year, and I was waiting on every day, listening to the news, listening to what's happening on a daily basis. So today, as I said already, that I'm disappointed that nothing has happened so far. But yes, I'm joining, and why? Because there are people who are responsible of destroying a whole city and destroying businesses, destroying people's lives, are held accountable for killing people, murdering, and negligence. And they knew. This is the painful part. They knew that it's there, and they did not do anything about it. And this shows us that how much people's lives are invaluable.
Yeah. Rana, I'm sorry, we do have to leave it there, but I want to thank you so much for your time and coming on. Rana Al-Dirani, we really appreciate what you've had to say today. It's worth saying, Rana touched on it a little bit there, that there's been a huge amount of psychological scars here in Beirut after the explosion. Our reporters here in Beirut have been talking to people experiencing mental health problems here. Let's have a look at their report.
This is Beirut in July 2021. We're at Hotel Dieu Hospital in the Ashrafia neighborhood. This is one of the main psychiatric wards in the country, and busier than ever. In Lebanon, as elsewhere, mental health issues are still quite taboo.
This is our treatment room here. And this is our gym.
How are psychiatric issues viewed nowadays in the public service?
These issues are becoming more accepted. There is still a stigma, but it's not as bad as it was a few years ago. There are lots of patients suffering from anxiety, depression, and PTSD. What many have in common is the inability to see a future for themselves, and that creates awful anxiety problems. These symptoms were less common during the Lebanese Civil War, because back then we could say to ourselves, there'll be an end to all of this. But now, there's no end in sight.
Lebanon's crisis has reached fever pitch in recent months, and for many, surviving the upheaval involves overcoming the knock-on effects on mental health.
I've been going through a sort of grieving period for months now, a grief I didn't want to recognize, that I still have trouble acknowledging. But it is real grief, and it's overwhelming. I can't quite believe it when I say it or write it down. But I'm grieving for a country that is in agony and is wasting away. I'm grieving for all that we had built up, for the splendor of our previous lives. I'm grieving for the dreams we had. There's also a lot of fear for the decline we're facing and for the loss of our dignity. Nowadays, it's simply impossible to be in denial. Things have become so bad. There's so much pain and suffering that we cannot deny the reality. We're using all our energy just to survive. The Lebanese are often described as resilient, but the idea of being resilient has become impossible and unthinkable.
Emotional distress, fear of what the future holds, and a sense of despair. This is the legacy of the terrible explosion that ripped through the port of Beirut.
Well, to talk a bit more about the mental health issues that people in Lebanon have been experiencing in the aftermath of the explosion, I want to bring in Ronnie McCartiff. Ronnie, thank you very much for talking to us today. You are a psychologist here in Lebanon. I know you've been working here a long time, and you were also affected by the explosion. Perhaps start by telling our viewers what happened to you a year ago today.
Well, exactly a year ago, I was just a few hundred meters from here, and I lost my eyesight because of the explosion, because of the apartment that I was in was completely blown and torn apart. And so it's particularly emotional for me to be here exactly a year later. But as you say, being a psychotherapist has tremendously helped me in working through the trauma that until then I was mostly seeing in clients. And becoming part of the crowd of victims, let's say, anonymous victims, adds something.
Yeah, I can't imagine the way that would have changed you as a psychologist. Talk to us a little bit about perhaps the way that your work has changed, different people that you've started to see as a result of what happened last year.
Well, I would say it's multi-faceted. Maybe the first basic difference is people see what has happened to me, and so I can see that in their look, in the energy that they exude when they come to see me. And you know, psychotherapists are supposed to be pretty neutral in terms of their own feelings, their own emotions. And so this is difficult to hide, right? The fact that there is that injury and then people were seeing it and asking me questions about it. So it was interesting to go beyond the, let's say, the norm or the rules that you learn in school or in your training, and to go beyond that. And actually, there's a very rich added layer of proximity that I find has been gained with my clients through that.
Can you give us a sense overall of the kind of the scale of the post-traumatic stress disorder here in Beirut after the explosion? I mean, it seems like everybody I talk to here has some kind of story.
Well, you know, mental health issues in general in Lebanon has been under a certain stigma. It's difficult to talk about it. And so this has added to the difficulty for people to process it. You know, it's the first thing that some people need to do about a trauma is to talk about it. So if you're not able to even say that you're having trouble sleeping or you're having trouble connecting to other people and being in a relationship, then it's a very difficult way for you to go beyond.
Yeah, so Beirut is grieving really now, isn't it? And if you forgive this, I want to quote something that I read that you had said elsewhere. You said, there are 5 stages of loss and grief, and I find that's similar to what's happening here in Beirut. Can you speak to us a bit about what you mean about those 5 stages in relation to the explosion?
Well, usually we talk about grief as losing somebody. And it's true that the first stages of that first one is kind of disbelief or refusal to accept past the shock, which is really the first thing. And it takes a while for somebody to actually accept it and go through with it and start their new life without the person that they love. And in this case, there's something very similar. It's like I was referring to the loss of my eye, I think at the time, when I said that I have to get used to being with just one eye as opposed to 2 when I look at myself in the mirror. And it's true that you have to go through that, pass through that first stage of refusal to kind of accept it and be able to move through in your life. And I find that for a lot of people, that first step or even those first 2 steps, they haven't been able to process them. So they're still in a state of shock a year later, and that cannot be very healthy.
Can I ask you then, have you used your own experiences, the fact that you lost your eye, as a way to help your patients so you can relate to their stories in a deeper, more intimate way?
I think it is not a direct way. It is more an underlying kind of posture that I probably have gained, maybe more empathy, because when you have suffered yourself, it is more accessible, let's say, to be empathetic to people who have suffered something similar. So I'm sure that it has created something more humane, less clinical, let's say. And I don't know if my clients see that, but at least I have seen that in myself.
Just finally, I want to ask you, Lebanon is experiencing in every sense now a brain drain. People are leaving, economists, doctors, nurses. Are there enough psychologists, mental health and professionals in Lebanon to deal with the scale of the problems that you've been referring to here? There's actually a microphone there for you, sir.
Thank you. Well, you know, I believe that situation creates the supply. As in a market, you know, more and more people needing psychotherapy, more and more needing help. We will see more and more providers of mental health. So I'm confident that will be there. And I'm not too worried about the brain drain, as you say. Of course, it is sad to see people leaving, but at the same time, you can understand that. But there is an incredible strength and dignity that I find in the Lebanese public, and I was really witnessing that today. There's a lot of dignity there, and I have a sense that collectively we will come through.
All right, Ronnie McCatif, thank you very much indeed for your time and for telling us your story today on France 24.
Thank you.
I want to turn now to bring you a report from our correspondents here in Beirut. They were a few weeks ago outside the home of the Interior Minister. Many people here believe that the Interior Minister has been obstructing justice in the investigation around what happened at the port. Let's have a little look at that report from my colleagues.
رئيس الجمهورية ورئيس الوزراء ورئيس النيابة ما بكون بعد الدفع أنا عشاككم محمد فهمي لابس بدلة بالدولة ضحك بعد
We're going to storm the minister's house. We have to put an end to impunity. We're not scared of anyone anymore. We're going to go all the way. We're going to go into their houses and we're going to throw them in jail. Just look at how they treat us, the families of the victims, but we'll crush them. We'll throw coffins at this bastard's house so he can sense death and know that both he and his family will die. That it will be his turn just as it was ours last August.
You think you win today?
Until now. We never win in this country. Never!
Well, joining me now to discuss the impact of the investigation and some of that anger for protesters as well, I'm joined now by Diane Assaf, a lawyer here in Beirut. Diane, thank you very much for coming on France 24 today. In that report, the anger of victims, of survivors of the explosion is extremely clear. They believe politicians are obstructing justice. Are they right to worry about that?
Of course, they're right to worry about that, and they are right to be angry. We are all angry. The lead investigator, Judge Tarek Bitar, requested permission to question Lebanon's most prominent security chief, Abbas Ibrahim, and Minister of Interior, Mohammed Fahmy, denied such permission. And also, Judge Bitar requested permission to question head of security state, Tony Saliba, and caretaker Prime Minister Hassan Diab declared that he wasn't the right authority to grant such permission. And Judge Bitar also requested the parliament to lift immunities and related to three members of parliament and former ministers, and parliament hasn't lifted the immunities yet. So clearly Judge Bitar is faced with legal maneuvers by powerful politicians who hide behind their immunities, and they use it as a shield from prosecution.
So it's extremely clear to you then that the politicians here are obstructing justice when it comes to the explosion at the port last year. Do you think then, under the Lebanese legal system, it's possible to get justice for the victims and the survivors?
I don't think that the Lebanese system, the Lebanese judiciary, is capable of reaching the truth or holding the murderers accountable because the lead investigator, Judge Tariq Bitar, works with very little resources. He doesn't have a team to support him. The political interference in the judiciary is flagrant. Just to give you an example, the first lead investigator, Judge Fadi Sawan, as soon as he charged politicians, he was removed, and he was removed by the court. The court decided that because his apartment was damaged in the blast, he couldn't be neutral in his investigation. And clearly, this argument is not convincing at all. Also, just to give you another example of the political interference in the judiciary, the Minister of Economy and Trade, Raoul Naameh, had asked the lead investigator, Judge Tariq Bitar, to issue an official statement stating that the act of wars and terrorism are probably not the cause of the blast, and this is to unblock some compensation payments from insurance companies, as if the victims cared about money.
Diane, let me ask you this. Given everything you're saying about the clear problems in the Lebanese judicial system, do you think the responsibility now falls on the international community? Do we need international lawyers and investigators in Beirut at that port to figure out what really happened?
Yes, I think so. I think we need the establishment of an international, impartial and independent investigative mission, and a letter has been sent from approximately 52 international NGOs and family victims to the United Nations Human Rights Council to demand the establishment of this investigative mission.
Finally, the former Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri, he talked about this idea of amending the Lebanese constitution so that to ensure that immunity is waived in the constitution. That sounds like quite a good idea, doesn't it? It sounds like he is trying to ensure that justice is done, but I know you don't agree. Tell us why.
It sounds like a good idea, but it's not. It's clearly, this position is clear to absorb the frustration and the anger of the Lebanese people. Amending the constitution is a very complicated and difficult process, and it will probably never happen. They should just lift the immunities and no need to amend the constitution. Immunities should be lifted. I'm going to give you 3 reasons quickly. First one, given the magnitude of the explosion, immunities should be lifted, period. 2, these immunities are here to protect the members of parliament's freedom of speech and opinion, and not to protect them from some crimes they might commit. And 3, the lead investigator judge is after these individuals in their role as ministers and not as members of parliament. So immunities should be lifted immediately.
All right, Diane Assaf, we're going to leave it there, but thank you very much indeed for sharing your time and your expertise with us here on France 24. You're watching a special program from us here in Beirut because we are exactly a year since that devastating explosion at the port just behind me that killed hundreds of people, left 300,000 people without homes here in the city. We are in the midst of a large protest here in Beirut. People are heading towards Parliament to voice their anger at politicians. Many people here simply believing that the politicians, as we were hearing there from the lawyer Diane Assaf, are obstructing justice. Well, it's worth saying as well that all of this comes amid a backdrop of a massive economic crisis here in Lebanon. Our colleagues Sally Farhat and Zaina Antonius have been reporting on the petrol crisis here in Lebanon. Here's their report.
Ali is a cab driver in Lebanon. He spends half his working hours waiting at gas stations in long lines like this one.
يعني بوقف مرتين بالنهار طبيعي لأن أنا تاكسي. على محطة البنزين بدك توقف ساعة، ساعة ونص، وأيام بتوقف على محطة الساعة والساعة ونص ما بيلحقك دور.
Fuel is not just scarce, its prices have gone through the roof. Lebanon's government is nearly bankrupt and had to lift partial fuel subsidies. As a result, it now imports fuel at the exchange rate of 3,900 liras for $1 instead of 1,500 liras. For Ali, the surge of gasoline price is not looking very good.
امبارح معبى ب100,000 بنزين، عامل فيهم شي 150,000. اليوم رحت عبيت رجعت فولت 65,000، يعني كل الصفيلة امبارح خسارة انه طلع لي 50,000. يعني اكل وشرب لناكل ببيتي، عندي عائلة و4 أولاد صعبة.
Economist Jihad Al-Hkayem explains that the fuel shortages also impact businesses in different sectors.
The problem is not that we need our cars and to fill the gasoline, to fill our cars, to fill the tanks with gasoline. The problem is broader, so it's going to affect hospitalization, it's going to affect tourists, it's going to affect the whole economy. All goods are going to be subject to an increase in prices, because for transportation, in order to transport the goods from one place to another, you need diesel.
In the face of the crisis, people have had to invent alternatives. Ahmad walks daily to a cafe near his home instead of going to work.
أنا بشتغل بشركة ببدارو، بشتغل currently من هون من هيدا الكافيه لأن ما معي بنزين بكفي لروح بالموتو تبعيتي واشتغل من الأوفيس تبعنا.
Lebanon's fuel crisis further threatens the country's already struggling economy, shaking even further citizens' confidence in Lebanon's ability to come out of its worst economic crisis.
Sally Farhat reporting for us there. Well, to talk more about the economic crisis here in Lebanon, I'm very pleased to be joined by Danielle Hassim. She's an economist herself. Danielle, first of all, let's talk about petrol, as that's what we were hearing about in that report. How serious is the petrol crisis in Lebanon today?
The petrol crisis is very serious. It's affecting every aspect of our life. It's affecting every business. It's affecting hospitals, education, literally everything. Allow me to factualize what fuel crisis means today in Lebanon. So fuel crisis means that there are days where you have 1 hour of electricity. I literally mean 1 hour over 24 hours, and that's not only in the suburbs. That's in Beirut city, that's in the capital, and the private generators, they cannot compensate for the shortages, hence you have hours and hours of complete darkness. A fuel crisis means as well that you have lives that are threatened because hospitals cannot operate properly. It also means that businesses will either have to shut down or increase tremendously their prices because they cannot operate and because they have to pay a very high generator's bill. It means that there will be days where you have no breads produced because bakeries cannot function properly. It also means that schools may not open in September because there is no electricity. It means that you cannot trust what you eat, what you're feeding your kids because there is no electricity. It also means that there is internet interruptions and businesses cannot function properly. And a lot of businesses are relocating outside of Lebanon. To sum it up, fuel crisis means that you're shutting down a complete economy today.
Shutting down the economy, that is how you put it as an economist yourself. Sketch for us then how it is that a Lebanese person in the city, in the capital, is functioning every day. How are people going to work? How are people keeping food cold in their fridges?
Let me describe for you a typical working day for a Lebanese so you can understand the prevailing work conditions. So the first thing they do in the morning is they wake up, they try to find an open gas station to fill their car fuel just to go to work. And then at work, let's say first, before, they need to wait hours and hours in line just to fill their car fuel, and that's if they're lucky and if they find an open gas station. And then at work, they feel threatened because they can dismiss them at any second. There is no motivation, there is no prospects for growth, and businesses, they don't even have internet. Some of them are running out of paper, and I literally mean here paper. And even their salary, it can mainly cover for maybe a week or two of basic necessities.
Well, let's talk, if we can, about salaries, because we know that the Lebanese lira has lost 90% of its value in 2 years now. So what kind of impact is that having on people? Many people's salaries have become largely worthless, haven't they? This is hyperinflation.
Yeah, the lira dropped, lost more than 90% of its value. We used to live at an era of artificial peg, where prices were relatively stable. We could afford basic necessities and even spend on leisure. And suddenly, we lost 90% of our purchasing power, and a lot of the Lebanese couldn't afford anymore even basic necessities. Today, the minimum wage is around $30. It's around $30, and this means it represents $1. The person who's earning a minimum wage earns $1 a day. How can this person survive? Their salaries, they haven't adjusted. They haven't adjusted at all to the depreciation of the Lebanese pound. And to give you an idea, a recent study was done by the American University. It shows that today a family needs around 5 times the minimum wage to buy food. I'm talking about food here. Do you realize that I'm talking about food?
And it suggests that the Lebanese middle class wants something thriving. I mean, Lebanon is known to have people like you who speak 3 languages, surely cannot survive. People are going abroad, aren't they?
Yeah, you know, a middle class, you usually define a middle class by people who can afford basic necessities. I'm talking here, they can afford food, groceries, electricity, rent, education for their kids, healthcare. Today in Lebanon, unfortunately, most of the population cannot afford basic necessities. This means that this crisis, which is the result of corruption and mismanagement from our politicians, erased the middle class. To give you an example, a university professor used to earn around $2,400 per month. Today, his salary is equivalent to around $180 a month, which means $8 a day. So this teacher is now poor. He's not considered middle class anymore. So you're basically putting the middle class is disappearing, and most of the population has now become poor, and this will have a drastic impact on the economy, because an economy cannot survive without the middle class.
You paint a really rather bleak picture of the Lebanese economy. We know that it's possible that if a new government is formed by Nadia Massih, that money will come in via a loan from the International Monetary Fund. If that happens, will that dramatically improve the economic situation here, or is it just plugging holes in a sinking ship?
Excuse me.
Okay, we need to...
يوم ظهورك الثاني المجيد برخمور ريش ريشوني
ونرفع المجد والشكر إليك وإلى أبيك المبارك وروحك الحي القدوس إلى الأبد.
ليكن الطيب العابق أمامك من ذخائر الشهداء ضارعا إليك يا ربنا من أجل الخطأ والضالين والمرضى والمضايقين ومن أجل السلام والوئام في بيعتك المقدسة والعالم بارك مورابون ريشيشوني.
There's a bit of the live ceremony from the court, the church service being presided over by the Maronite patriarch Bashar al-Rai. I now want to bring you a package by our correspondents. It's looking at people leaving the country via Tripoli by boat because of the scale of the economic crisis here. Here's that report.
Tripoli is Lebanon's second largest city and its poorest. It is also the departure point for more and more Lebanese leaving their country by sea. Left with few options, they climb aboard boats, risking their lives. Mohammed had made it to Cyprus by boat, but ended up being deported.
Listen to what I'm telling you. Life does not get any harder than living under this government. If my options are to stay here or go and drown in the sea, what do you think I'll choose? Of course, I'll choose the sea and death. It's true that lately people are getting on boats without a second thought. The only fear they really have is for this government.
There's nothing for us in this country. No medicine, no milk, nothing for my poor son who is ill.
Mohammed is now back to square one. This humble dwelling in the Mina neighborhood is where he lives with his wife and their 7 children. And life is a daily struggle for them.
The government doesn't care if my children are educated or if they get the best start in life. They just wipe their feet on us, generation after generation. They're crushing the people. In Europe, everyone respects the law because leaders themselves respect the law. But here, the children of those in power drive around in nice cars, while our children are being sacrificed.
The next chance he gets, Mohammed will again try to leave, fleeing his homeland, and with the sense that the only hope lies elsewhere.
That report there by Cyril Payan and Bilal Tarabi, looking at the reasons why some people in this country are choosing to leave by boat because of the economic crisis here. Well, let's talk a little bit more about that with Sarah Al-Yafi. She's a public policy consultant and a political activist based here in Beirut. Sarah, thanks for coming on France 24 today. We just heard a little bit in that report, sort of the scale of the economic problems here, and that's pushing people to leave the country. I know, however, you're choosing to stay. Talk to us a little bit about why it's important for you to be in Beirut as an activist and what your message is today.
Thanks for that question. You know, the World Bank recently qualified the Lebanese crisis as the 3rd worst in probably all modern history, or one of the top 3. So what we're talking about and what's actually going on is really literally unprecedented. And the fact that people are leaving, all of them are leaving, not because not because they desire to do that, but because they're forced to, because their livelihoods, their literal livelihoods are at stake. As for me, the very core of everything that I believe I represent and everything that I choose to do is I wish to at least speak the truth about what's going on here, and I won't be able to do this if I'm abroad. But further than speaking the truth, it's trying to bridge the action to the truth, because we need to get rid of this political mafia. We need to get rid of this political class, and we're not going to do it just by sitting outside. So that's it.
So let's link that if we can. You want to remove the political class. Why is that linked, in your view, to what happened here at the port? What is the link between the political class and that devastating explosion last year?
I think saying link is understating what it is. It is the political class that exploded the port. And whether or not we are looking at external factors, which I am not going to brush upon at the moment, I'm just going to talk about the political class responsibility. There are specific rules and laws that pertain to storing ammonium nitrate. Let's just talk about just the negligence aspect, which I believe is the least important of them. The negligence aspect, a first-year chemistry student at a university will tell you what should happen to ammonium nitrate to be stored properly. They stored it by the port for 7 years or 8 years, completely without respecting any chemical factor. Further to that, there are Article 17 of the Lebanese law states that if the nitrogen in the ammonium nitrate is above 33.5%, bear with me for a second, then it should get the permit or permission from the Ministry of Economy, it should get the permission from the Council of Ministers, and it should get the permission from the army to enter the port of Beirut. Did any of that happen? No. So that's a violation of Lebanese law. We're not even talking about what actually caused the explosion, which is insane in of its own. Further, they all knew. The Attorney General sent letters talking about the danger of this because it did say it's explosives, not to be actually confused with ammonium nitrate that could be used as agricultural grade fertilizer. This was explosives. It was written on the papers that came through the port. The Attorney General knew, the Prime Minister knew, the President knew, and you know what they answered? We don't have any prerogatives.
And what's interesting about that, in my view, 1 year on, is that we do know that those politicians knew about the ammonium nitrate in the port. Not only have they failed to act, but nobody has been charged a year on. Nobody has been held accountable. It looks a little bit like politicians are closing rank to protect each other. Go ahead.
Not only are they not charged, they are immunizing themselves legally. They're literally immunizing each other and themselves not to be called to court. And the judiciary system for the majority is actually completely in bed with them. And I would like to actually benefit from this moment to tell you a little bit of an anecdote that goes a little further than the negligence or the unlawfulness or the fact that prerogatives don't exist and the President of the Republic's office doesn't exist. Forget that for a second. When the explosion occurred on August 4th, 2020, right after the explosion occurred, there were devastating damages, but there were also survivors right here. Rescuers came from Limoges in France. Dutch rescuers came. They didn't let them enter the scene of the blast. You know what they ended up doing for the day? They went to lunch in the mountains. There is a story of a gentleman called Joa'i. Really, this name is one of the main reasons why I'm here, because Joa'i was not killed by the explosion, he was killed by the political class. His phone was still ringing. His phone was still ringing right at the explosion site. When his mother pleaded with the authorities to look for her son, you know what they told her? We don't have generators to light the search. We're gonna have to wait till the morning. That's not negligence, that's a type of sociopathy or criminality. Joa'i is not a victim of the explosion. Joa'i is a victim of the mafia political class.
It sounds to me from what you say then that you are not particularly optimistic about the potential incoming new government of Nadia Massih. Tell us a little bit about what you'd like to see in place of him and how Lebanon might get there.
It's impossible to be optimistic if the same heads are still designing the government. And it's just, I remove this hat, you wear it for a second, and then you give me this hat and I'll wear it. They're literally playing the hat trick. So it's like if I change my hat, it doesn't mean that my politics or my immunization against justice is changing at all. So I'm definitely not hopeful for that government, but I am hopeful in the Lebanese people, which is everything that we are seeing today. That for a first time, a people has found its voice again. Because for a long time, they were held hostage. We were held hostage by the mafia and the militia. And our voices were not being heard because we were not sounding our voices. They were sounding our voices. We are sounding our voices like never before. And that's going to be translated one way or another with change. Whether it's tomorrow or in a year or in 5 years, it doesn't matter because it has begun.
Now, let me ask you this. That is an extremely powerful argument that you put. I hate to give a counter one, but let me try. In 2019, there were also huge protests here in Beirut. Again, they were the first time that we had sort of protest that cut across sectarian lines, everybody saying all political leaders need to go. Ultimately, unfortunately, those protests were not successful. So now, given what's happened at the port, does Lebanon have the momentum for that same kind of revolution again, or are people simply too tired? Do they have your confidence?
May I push back against that with a couple of ideas? And I completely understand what you mean by saying that they were not successful. That is also the opinion of some people here. But I will tell you why that, in my opinion, is not true. Today, the political class that used to, we have an expression in Arabic that say you can butcher with your fingernail. They were butchering with their fingernail. Their word was almost God-ordained word. They can't even show their faces in public anymore. They cannot go to the restaurant, they cannot go to the coffee shop, they cannot be seen strolling with their family down the Corniche. You know why? That's because the revolution has been successful in actually shaming them for their not irresponsibility or negligence, for their criminality. And further to that, let's not forget that the coronavirus really didn't help us. Plus what I mentioned earlier, which is the economic crisis that has completely shattered the Lebanese person's daily needs, water, electricity, food. But still, despite that, they're here, they're protesting, they're calling out names, they're calling for justice, and they're not giving up. And for me, it's successful because in the face of such tragedy, in the face of the worst economic and financial and banking and fiscal and social and political crises that the modern world has ever witnessed, in the face of the largest non-nuclear explosion that the world has witnessed in its entire history, in the face of poverty, in the face of these dismal numbers of education and unemployment and all of that, they are in the streets asking for change and representing change. They're saying we're not looking for change away from who we are. This is what we are. We are the change that we need to see, literally. And I believe in the deepest depth of my being that it's going to materialize one way or another, sooner or later.
Sarah Al-Yafi, thanks for coming. Thank you for your optimism here on France 24 today. We'll let you go join those protests that you're so passionate about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being here.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. Well, we're coming to the end of this special program from here in Beirut. Thank you very much for watching as well. We want to leave you now with some of perhaps the most iconic images of what happened last year on the 4th of August 2020. Let's have a look at some of those images from the explosion, and then we'll hand you back to our teams in Paris. Thank you, and good night from Beirut.
الانفجار دمر نص بيروت، يعني كأنه كبب قنبلة ذرية على نص بيروت.
جميزة كلها انهارت، البور راح كله، اوتوستراد راح كله، كل العالم بالسيارات دعوست من يعني في بناية وقعت على السيارات.
يعني أول مرة يعني أكيد شفت حفلات شوي، بس مثل اليوم ما بحياتي خفت هيك.
لبشت عائلتي لملمكم، طلعت على البلكون عم بتفرج، مجزرة مجزرة مجزرة.
People were screaming in every place. We went down the street, like you would see a hand, you would see an arm, you would see people bloody, people screaming. There was a lady standing over there and there was blood going out of her neck.
لا ما شالون كبون بالبحر شالون بالمره خلينا على الشغل يقتلوا العالم فيهم بيقتلوا العالم اللي قاعدين مرة كراسيهم.
إذا نحن ما بنعمله مين رح يعمله؟ ما في دولة نسوق الدولة ما في دولة.
We are the state, we are the government, us the civilians, and we will build the country that we want.